Hello everyone and welcome to another Fusion 360 Tech Thursday. I'm Brad Tallis from Autodesk, and I know a lot of you are probably going, hey, you said you were going to be gone for like 6 weeks or so. I'm back. I ended up canceling my sabbatical early because of all the craziness that's going on right now. I hope all of you, you're our family. We love seeing you guys on the chat and all these live streams. We at Autodesk really hope you are all doing okay. We're making a mission to put out as much information as we can about our products, like these live streams. So please keep an eye out. We're going to be putting a ton of information out there. In fact, Jason and I are currently working on filling in our calendar. I did see a comment yesterday on Tyler's live stream that some of you were confused when these live streams are happening. So what I personally recommend is in YouTube, do a search for Autodesk Fusion 360's channel and make sure you subscribe to our channel. You'll see all of our upcoming live streams right here. And you'll notice, like, for example, Jason's going to be doing one on the fundamentals of sketching and some advanced sketching, and you can see when they're scheduled, at what time, etc. We're even going to try some different time slots. We're going to be bringing some more cam live streams coming up here pretty soon, so definitely keep an eye out and maybe add these to your personal calendar. I know it says set reminder, but I even experienced yesterday, I signed up for Tyler's live stream and it didn't alert me, unfortunately. So I personally recommend adding them into your calendar, and come back and check this page every day or so, because we're going to be adding a lot more information in there. I do have my friend Jason on the chat today to help us out. So if you have any questions or comments, definitely put them in there. And also, if you have any ideas for topics that you would like our team to focus on upcoming live streams, throw them in the chat also, and we'll see what we can do to accommodate those. So, I'm going to continue my live stream on this little laser projector thing. The part we're going to be working on today is this front component. So, not too complicated. But I'm going to talk a lot more about like draft this time. Now, again, I'm not showing you exactly how to design this thing from scratch. I've seen a lot of comments like, well, can you 3D print it? And what about draft angles and parting lines and all that kind of stuff? My main focus is to teach you more about tips and methodologies using Fusion 360. So today I am going to focus a little bit more on draft, and we're going to add draft to this part. Whereas on maybe some of the other parts that I've done, I didn't worry too much about draft. You absolutely could add draft in there, but I was focusing more on like maybe sketching or replace face or something. So let's dive in. I'm going to switch my screen to Fusion. Another thing is I'm also creating these parts individually, and I typically don't do that. I usually design in context where I use existing models to help me with my design. But in this example, I'm actually going to be using, drawings to create these parts. Okay, you notice it's giving me a warning because I deleted the part that the drawing is referencing, but that's okay. And again, just like I mentioned before about I'm not showing you exactly how to do everything. These drawings are not, perfect drawings. They have enough dimensions on here to allow us to get through how to create this part. So I've included this drawing. I've also included the outline that I usually put together in the description of the video. So make sure you grab those. Okay, let's dive right in. So we're going to be creating this component right here, and you'll notice I use the term component because that's one of the first steps I'm going to do. But you can kind of, again, break it down into some simple forms. And this first one is what I'm going to call the cup. It's basically this ring right here. We're going to create this profile on the inside that you see, and then we're going to do these posts. And it might be kind of hard to see, but they have some drafted ribs on them that we're going to also create. So that's what we're going to be doing in today's project. So let me jump back to Fusion. So the very first thing I like to do is to create a new component. Now there's different ways you can do this to get the same result. So you'll notice under the Assemble menu, New Component. Under the Create menu, New Component. Exact same thing. Or I can even right click at my top level over here in my browser and say New Component, and it'll go ahead and create a component. And I kind of like this method because it doesn't ask me for a name or anything like that. I could just leave it Component 1, or I could double click on it and give it a name. So let's go ahead and let's just call this front mount or something like that. Now the reason I like to use components is everything is going to be captured underneath it, like my sketches, bodies, etc. So I'm going to start with a sketch. And in this example, I'm going to use the right plane. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this right plane. Hopefully you've noticed we pushed a release out, I think it was last weekend or so, some really cool new functionality with 3D sketching. I have seen in the forums a lot of people are asking why they see, like for example, let me turn on 3D Sketch, why they see like a triad. Let me just do this real quick and try it again. There. Why they see this new little triad thing. If you're sketching and you see this thing, the reason is because of this 3D Sketch. So go ahead and turn that off. However, if you don't know what 3D Sketch is, I highly recommend you watch Tyler's live stream that he did yesterday, all on 3D sketching. He made this really cool bumper frame on an ATV. That is on our Fusion 360 live channel. Make sure you watch that. It was really cool and really well done. So, okay, so if I wanted to point that out because I've seen that a lot in the forum. So turn 3D Sketch off if you see that triad. Okay, I'm going to just start by creating the main shape, which is, you know, a circle that's, according to the drawing, 3.65 in diameter. Okay, now I've shown this trick before, but I'm going to highlight it again because I'm going to show you some issues with it here in just a little bit. I could hit Finish Sketch, or I can just click on my profile, right mouse click, and you'll see some commands that make sense. You'll see two different kinds of extrudes and offset plane. You'll always want to do the first extrude, and I get asked, what's the difference? Well, the first extrude is a solid extrude. The second one is what we would call a surface, like a thin-walled face. So it basically would create almost like a ribbon in a circle. Well, we obviously want this to be a solid, so I'm going to use this first extrude. I'll drag that up just to kind of get a little bit of a preview. And again, according to the drawing, I want to extrude that 1 1/4 in this case. And again, I'm not going to go to the drawing too much, but you can see right there, there's the 1 1/4. Okay. There's a really small fillet, 0.05 on the bottom of the part. So I'm going to go ahead and pre-select that edge, right mouse click, and it shows me the commands that make sense. So let's just do a 0.05 radius fillet. Okay, so this is kind of the beginning of the cup. Now, we want to hollow this out. And one of my favorite commands is I pre-select a face, and I'm going to use shell. Okay, and what this allows me to do is to define a wall thickness. And in this case, I'm going to type in 0.08 is the thickness, and there we go. Okay, now I could have drawn a side profile, right? I mean, I could have drawn an L shape and added the fillet as a profile and then revolved it around using the revolve command. That would have totally created the same part. But I kind of like doing it like this because I can always come back and easily change the shell thickness if I need to. And I could obviously do that with a sketch also. But I like to keep my sketches simple. You've heard me say this multiple times. And let Fusion do the hard work for me. So I created a very simple sketch, and we used the shell command. Okay, the next thing I want to create, and they're kind of hard to see, but there's these little standoffs inside the model right here. And here's a kind of like a detail view of what these are. Okay, So, and they are let me see, there's a view here. Here we go, a section view. There's these little standoffs because we're going to create this counterbored hole that goes through here that kind of screws go through to assemble the whole thing together. And we can see that these are 0.15 off of the bottom of the part. So a neat tool here is this offset plane. So I'm going to go ahead and click on offset plane. I'm going to select this inside face because that's where the dimension is coming from. And so it basically creates a plane on that face. But I can now offset it a certain distance from that face and then create a sketch on it. So in this case, we want it to be 0.15. And if I kind of look at it from the side here, you can kind of see that sure enough, that plane is above that inside face, 0.15. And this is going to allow me to create a sketch on that plane. And I'm just going to draw one of those circles. Now, it's a 0.25 diameter circle, and you'll notice again, and I've mentioned this in previous live streams, I purposely draw it off center and not where it's supposed to be. Then I force it using either constraints or dimensions where I want it to go. So for example, I want this to be vertical with my center point. So I used the horizontal vertical constraint and I clicked on it, and you can see how it forced it to go to be in line with my center point. Then I'm going to grab these 2 points here to specify a dimension, and it's supposed to be 1.674 up. And you'll notice that the circle turned black, which means it's been fully constrained. It can't move left or right, and it can't move up or down because the dimension constrains it up and down, and the constraint constrains it from going left to right. Okay, again, keeping my profile very simple here. Now what I want to do is we're going to actually use this sketch multiple times. So I usually expand open my component, and here again you can see how everything is organized. Its own origin, its own body, its own sketch, any construction planes that were used. I'll expand open my sketches. We'll get back to that here in a minute. And then I can click on my profile. So I'm going to select it and say extrude. Now watch what happens when I start to drag down. You can see that it's turning red, and that's because the circle interferes with the body. Well, I want to turn this into a solid, so I'm going to say instead of cutting the material, I want to join the material, and I want it to go to this inside face. I'm just going to click on that face, and you can kind of see how it's going to snap down. So as I start to drag to kind of see what it looks like, but then when I click, you can see how it snaps down, and I don't have to type in a distance. Again, anytime I type something in, I might accidentally type in 1.5 or 0.14 or whatever and make a mistake. So I'm telling Fusion to snap to that inside face. And I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And we now have this little feature. Okay. I'm going to turn my sketch 2 back on, and I'm going to select that profile again. Right click and say extrude, but this time I'm going to start to drag up. And in this case, I do want to, basically cut this little scallop or this little pocket into here, and I want it to go all the way to the top. So I just click on this top face. Okay, you can kind of see what it's doing. I'll say OK. And we use the same profile to create the plastic part down here, and we use the same profile to basically allow room for a screw head or something like that to come down into here, or a screwdriver or whatever it might be. And that was just by turning that sketch back on. I can turn it back off to kind of simplify my screen here. Okay. Okay. So the next thing we want to do is we created one of these, but I need multiple ones, and I could pattern this around, but I also showed in the drawing that there's this counterbored hole. In fact, if I scroll out here, if you guys are using the drawing, and you might see some terminology you're not familiar with. So you'll see I have a 0.1 diameter hole right here. And then this means counterbore. So we're going to do a 0.21 diameter counterbore that's 0.13 deep. And that's what that symbol means. And there's 6 of them around, okay? So that's what that terminology means right there. So I'm going to show you a really cool trick here. I'm going to use the hole command. So I'm going to come in here and say hole, or I could use H as a shortcut. And then I'm just going to click somewhere random on the screen. And you can kind of see it puts a preview what this is going to look like. Okay. But I can't see where this needs to go. And if I start to drag, I don't have anything to snap it to. Which, you know, you've seen me before, I could snap it to the center really easily. If there's that existing little dot, I can snap it to it. But you'll notice there isn't one over here. Well, if I click on this reference, and then I'm going to rotate and click on this arced edge right here, you'll see that it moved over. Okay, and even though this edge is, you know, up above the bottom of the part, it is now perfectly centered with that existing little plastic standoff. Okay, so that's a cool little trick using that reference. Okay, the next thing I want to do is I want to do a counterbored hole. So I'm going to go ahead, and this is a simple hole where you can see it's just basically like a drill straight through. I'll go ahead and click on this one, and you can see how the image updates and gives me a little bit more information. I like to type in my, well, I got a weird error that appeared. Hopefully we're still sharing okay. You can see the diameter right here. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight the diameter. And this is supposed to be 0.1 according to the drawing. Then the counterbore diameter, I'm going to, again, according to the drawing, is supposed to be 0.21. And the depth, which you can see I've already done this, is 0.13, okay? So you might have to change these numbers. Yours might be different, okay? And then for the height, what I typically do, and you'll see there's an arrow right here, I'm gonna just start to drag that down, and then I can reference a face. I'm just gonna click on that face, and you'll see it changed it from like 2.5 inches or whatever it was. It's now drilling through to that face right there. Let's kind of zoom up on this a little bit, and you'll see, sure enough, we now have a counterbored hole. It's, the hole itself is 0.1 in diameter, and then we specified the diameter of the counterbore and the diameter, or the depth of the counterbore. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And that was, you know, it took a couple, you know, a minute or two for me to explain that, but the hole command is extremely powerful because it creates it as a feature in the timeline, and I can always come back and edit or change that. I didn't have to create a sketch and do a revolve or anything like that. Okay. Cool, so I've pretty much finished what I want this standoff to look like, so I'm going to pattern it around. So we'll say create pattern, circular pattern. Okay. Now by default, this usually comes up as faces, and I would have to come in and manually click all of these faces, including all of the counterbore and all that kind of stuff, okay, which would take some time and could potentially result in an error. So instead, I'm going to change my pattern type from faces to features, okay? What this allows me to do is to actually select features in the timeline. And so we can see here, kind of going back in time, so here's the hole, here was the extrude cut, here was the extrude join. So I'm actually going to select all 3 of these features in the timeline, and you'll notice that it selected all of the faces for me automatically. So much faster and much more precise. Okay, so it found 3 features. My axis, I'll just click on a circular edge or a circular face, And quantity, I can either type in or hit this little up or down arrow. So I'm going to say 6. I'll say OK. And I now have those standoffs inside and on the outside. You can kind of see the counterbores going all the way around. So a really quick way of saving time by using the pattern. And again, I could have done this in my original sketch. You know, I could have patterned a circle all the way around, but I would have had to done multiple extrudes, etc., etc. So again, I love the keeping my sketches simple and letting Fusion do the work for me. Okay, the next thing I want to do is we're going to create this little cutout you see inside the part. And again, actually let me turn it right side up. Pretty simple. I can see a circle and a couple rectangles with filleted edges. So I'm going to keep my sketch simple. Now what I'm going to do is, you know, I could create another sketch on this face, but I have my original sketch that we first started out with way back here in time, and I can actually edit that. But watch what happens when I edit it. We're way back at the very beginning, so you don't see any 3D model or anything like that. But in this case, that's okay. Okay, so I'm going to start out by creating another circle. Again, according to the drawing, it's 1.97. I'm going to create a rectangle, and I like to use this center rectangle. So I'm going to click on that little icon there, click my center, and you'll notice that the rectangle is being created from the center. Okay, so this is supposed to be 0.875 by 2.5, again, according to the drawing here. Okay, so I created that rectangle. Now I want to create another rectangle that's perfectly centered up here. So I'm going to say rectangle, center. Now I'm going to show you a neat little trick here. If I hover near this edge, you'll notice that it's kind of snapping to that edge. So it wants to create this center rectangle coincident with that edge. Now if I get right here, you'll notice it doesn't seem to be snapping vertically, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click somewhere. In fact, I'm going to over exaggerate. I'm going to click way over here and create my rectangle. Okay, so in this case, it's 0.3 tall, 0.3 by 0.42 wide. Okay, now if I were to grab this point, you'll notice that it wants to stay on that circle because it created that coincident constraint for me automatically. You can see them right there. But of course, I want this to be perfectly centered and vertical from here. So I'm going to say horizontal vertical. I want that point and that point. And notice what it does. It keeps it on the existing circle, but it made that center point be perfectly lined up, vertically constrained with the center of the circle. So again, just a little tip that I use, I kind of draw it off center and then I watch it get moved into place. And again, we can see that it's perfectly constrained because it's turned black instead of the blue. Okay, so here's the thing I was going to show you. Earlier I showed you I could pre-select my profile. So I'm going to go ahead and select these profiles, okay, to extrude. I didn't say finish sketch. But when I right mouse click and say extrude, we don't see anything, and it's extruding this instead of cutting it. Now, why is this? And I'm pointing this out because I've seen in the forum sometimes people say, I'm getting a weird result or whatever. So check this out. The reason why is because we edited the very first thing we ever did, which was create a sketch. The extrude for the cup hasn't happened yet, or the shell, etc. So my little shortcut I just showed you doesn't really help me in this particular situation. However, if I say finish sketch, now we're at the end of our timeline because we went back here and edited it in time. but then it went and finished everything, including the pattern and the shell and everything like that. But I now need to turn on sketch 1. And there it is. You can kind of see it's underneath my model, okay? So sometimes that pre-select and not having to say finish sketch is really handy, but in some situations it won't work, like in this case, okay? So I'm going to select my profile. I'll say extrude. I'll start to drag, okay? How far? Well, I could say, in this case, I could say through all, but I'm just gonna go ahead and select that face right there, and it's gonna snap to that face. And you can see it took that profile and cut through the body. I'll go ahead and turn off my sketch. Again, I don't need to see them all the time. And then let's just take a look at the drawing really quick. You'll notice I have a radius of 0.125, 10 places. You can kind of see it all the way around. You'll notice that there's like a rectangle in here also. I turned on my sketch so I could kind of show like how to dimension and all that kind of stuff there. So you can kind of see that. And then we've got 2 of them that are 0.02, okay? So what I'm gonna do is select one of these edges and say fillet. 0.125. We can kind of see what that looks like. And then I'm just gonna control select, working my way around, and you'll notice even if the edge is hidden, I can still click on it. Let me pan over just a little bit. Sometimes that gets in the way. Now, for example, this edge I can't really get because it's kind of around the corner. So I'm just gonna continue working my way around, grabbing all of the edges that I can see, and then I might rotate to a slightly different orientation, something like this, and then I can continue my selection. So you can see I can grab that edge. Let me zoom up a little bit, grab this edge, oops, that edge and that edge there. And so you'll see that I was able to grab all of those edges with basically just one move in between. Now all of these 10 edges are 0.125. I could say okay, and then create another fillet for these little guys up here, but I like this functionality. Since this is like all one basic profile, I'm gonna come in here and hit this add new selection. And what that's gonna allow me to do is come in and say, I want that edge there to be 0.02. And you can see how these are large, but that one's small. In fact, I could come in and grab that edge there. You'll see there's 2 edges that are 0.02. And when I say okay, I'm only gonna have one fillet feature in my timeline. Okay, you can see it right there. But if I were to come back and need to change that, I could edit this, and I can see all of the sizes that kind of have to do with this one, cut through feature. So kind of a neat little tip right there is you can add multiple selections if need be. Okay. Looks like we're doing okay. So the next thing I want to do is add some draft, okay? Again, I'm kind of breaking this part into like these subcomponents. So we're working with this cup, and then I'm gonna come in and do these little standoffs. But because you guys were asking about, well, how would you manufacture this part? You'd have to have draft for it to be able to come out of an injection mold or something like that. I'm gonna talk about the draft command. Now, when you do an extrude, I'm gonna go all the way back here. When you do an extrude, you'll notice that there's this taper angle. So I'm gonna say like 2 degrees. Let me go 5 degrees so you can kind of see it better. You'll notice that when it's extruding, it's actually adding 5 degrees of draft or taper to this. I personally don't like using this because if I needed to change my draft from 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters or something like that, or I'm sorry, 1 degree to 2 degrees, I don't want to be able to have to hunt where that was, okay? So I like to use the draft command, okay? What this allows you to do is to specify a draft plane, specify which faces you want drafted, and then specify the degrees of draft. Now, the first thing it's asking for is a plane. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on this top face. You'll notice that it says plane is selected. Now it's asking which face. I'm going to select one face for now. A lot of people get confused. What's a draft plane? And the best way I can explain it is basically it's the surface that you would attach a hinge to rotate the face. So for example, if I grab this little guy here and start to rotate, you're going to see that it's going to hinge on this line right here. Okay. So this is my draft plane, and you'll notice I added, like in this case, let's just say 5 degrees of draft. So it's drafting down like so. Okay. If I were to say my draft plane was down here, and this might work, might not work. Yeah, there we go. You can kind of see it. It's going to hinge around this edge down here. Okay, because this is my draft plane. So the best way to think of it is your draft plane is where you want to hinge the faces around. Okay, and in this case, we're going to do a pretty small draft. I think, in fact, let me see my angle. I think it's just 0.5 for the draft angle. It's a little bit hard to see, but if I hold down my control key, you can kind of see it toggle from flat. So kind of watch in this area right here, and then you can kind of see it extend a little bit. Okay. So I'm going to come in here and add in more faces. So let me I'll clear that. I'm going to say this face, this face, this face, and you'll see how it's going to draft those faces. Okay. So I'm just going to walk around real quick, grab these vertical faces in here, and it's going to add ½ degree of draft to that. Okay, which might be enough for a part this size. I'm not an injection molder or anything like that. Okay, now what about these vertical faces right here? Let me kind of move back where our cursor is. Okay, I want to draft this face here also. Now watch what happens when I select that face. You'll see that it looks like it gets a little bit bigger. Okay, now why is that? Well, it's hinging around this plane way up here. Okay, so be aware of that. So in this case, I might want to make my draft plane actually be on this face I'm hovering over right now instead of this face up here. And then it would hinge right here and draft ½ degree. So just be aware of the different result. Okay. In fact, I'm going to do that. Actually, in the outline, I didn't do that. I just selected it. So I'm going to keep doing what I did with the outline. So I'm going to select them like so. It's going to add ½ degree of draft. It's going to keep everything the same, which is good. And one last one right there. I'll say okay. Okay. Now, like I said, I'm not showing you exactly how to do this. I'm showing you different methods. Could I have added my draft before I did my pattern? Could I have added my draft to the little boss and that cutout and then patterned? Absolutely. In fact, that's probably a better method than how I did it now that I'm thinking about it. It's like I had to select a whole bunch of faces. I should have drafted the cup and then drafted the boss, etc., and then patterned it. So again, multiple different ways of doing this. So in fact, Jason's probably answering comments like, why did he do it that way? So okay, moving on. So I want to basically, I've created the cup, I've created the cutout, I've added some draft. The next thing I want to work on is creating these little ribbed standoffs. So I'm going to go ahead and work on that next. Okay. So this time I am going to create a new sketch because I want the standoffs to be on this like inside face here. So I might just select it, create a sketch. And again, this kind of helps me simplify my design. Instead of always editing one sketch and making it really complicated, I now basically have a sketch that just has to deal with these little standoffs. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a circle. Again, purposely not drawing it where it's supposed to be. I am drawing it the right size though, but I'm just going to go ahead and draw 2.3 circles here. I could have drawn one and then made the other one equal to that. It's whatever method you want to do there. I do know that they need to be vertical with each other. So I'm going to select one and then select the other one, and you'll see how this one moved over. Now I'm going to undo. Hopefully you've all watched my live streams where I've given some tips and tricks on constraints. And I get asked a lot, does it matter which order you click? And the answer is yes, kind of, and it depends. And I know that's a funny answer, but I've come up with a phrase that helps me remember. So I'm going to do my constraint, and my phrase is click to keep. So I'm going to click this one because I want to keep this location. So click to keep, and then I'll click this guy, and you'll notice that it moved over to match that one. Okay, so let me undo again. I'll do the exact same thing, but this time I'm going to click to keep that one. I'll click that one, and you'll see how it moved over. So that's one of those little methodologies I've come up with, click to keep. So if it matters to you which one stays put, maybe remember that phrase. So click to keep, that one's gonna line up vertically with it. Now in this case it doesn't matter because we're gonna dimension it. So I'm gonna throw a dimension from here to here. I want that to be a vertical dimension, and it is supposed to be 0.7 up. And let's do a horizontal dimension. I'll kind of pan a little bit so you can kind of see the dimension easier. And it's supposed to be 1.05 over. And you'll notice that is now fully constrained. This one is still vertical with it, but you'll notice that it's not constrained fully yet. And the reason for that is because it can move up or down. Okay, so let's add a dimension here. And that is supposed to be 1.05 according to the drawing. And now we can see that it is constrained also. Now I want this on the other side, so I need to mirror this. But to be able to mirror, I have to have a line to mirror, or something to mirror with. So I'm going to draw a line from the center straight up. Okay. Now I don't want this to be an object line, so I select it. I tell it to be construction, and you'll notice that it changed to this dashed line. So it's no longer an object line. It's not going to cut through my profiles or anything like that. But now I have something that when I say mirror, what are the objects? That circle and that circle. What's my mirror line? I now have something I can select. Unfortunately, you can't select like dimension extension lines or anything like that, and that's why I had to physically create a line. So I'm going to go ahead and select it. You can see how it mirrors to the other side. I'll say OK. And just like before, I could come in here without even having to say finish sketch. I can come in here and select these profiles. I'll go ahead and grab those guys and say extrude, and when I do that, you'll notice it finishes my sketch for me automatically. I can start to drag those up, and the height is supposed to be 2.57 in this case. Okay, and again, I could add taper to it, but I don't like to. That's just a personal preference. I'll say OK, and we now have this extrusion. Okay, so we're going to add some draft to these posts. And again, I kind of like to keep them sort of organized. So I know that this is my extrusion of my post, then I'm going to do my draft. So I'll come in here and say draft. Now I'm going to show again two different results. If my draft plane was up here and this was my face, you'll notice that the bottom got bigger. Okay, fact, let me say like 2 degrees or something like that. So this face is hinging on this top face right here. And so obviously it's getting bigger at the bottom. Let me go set this back to 0.5. If I change my draft plane to be this face, you'll notice that the top gets smaller. And again, it's because it's hinging the angle on this bottom inside face. And in fact, that's what we want to do. We want to select this inside face as our plane. And then I can come in here and say, I want these 4 faces. And you'll see the tops get kind of smaller with that 1/2 degree of draft. And that's what we want in this case. It'll allow it to be pulled out of the mold easier. Okay. I'll say okay. And there we go. Okay. I'm just looking at my outline here, making sure we're on track and doing everything. So the next thing I want to do, I don't know if we can see it on the camera. There's some holes inside here, and they actually go all the way through. So I'm going to show you some cool tips with using the hole command. Now, again, many different ways I could create this part. I could have created one of these, put the hole through it, and then mirrored it multiple times, but you'll see here that it's not symmetrical as much as you think. And that's why I ended up creating 4 of these. And also, it's not symmetrical in how the ribs are created. If I zoom up on this one, you'll see there's like 3 little ribs here, but then there's a larger rib on this guy here. So that's why I ended up drawing all 4 of them. And we're basically gonna work on one at a time and then pattern some of the stuff that we've done. So I want to create holes that go through these posts. Excuse me. Now, if I use the hole command, it only lets me do one at a time. So I click on this face and it's going to let me do the hole on this face. However, there's a really cool option in here from sketch for multiple holes. Okay, but it does require a sketch to do this. So that's what I'm going to do. Let's create a sketch maybe on this top face. I'll say create sketch. Now I want to grab information, so I'm going to project. So create, project. I always use the P key for the shortcut. And I'm just going to click on these top faces here. And you can even see in the preview, you can see the draft that's been added to all of this here, because you kind of see those double lines and stuff. Okay, so I projected those 4 faces. And then I'm going to use a command that you haven't seen me use very often called point. What this is going to allow me to do is I just have to get near the center, and because we've projected that geometry, it kind of snaps to the center. And when I click, it's going to create a point at the center of each of these projected circles, okay, that are sitting on top of these little posts. Now when I use my hole command, I'll come in here and say hole. What's my placement? I'm going to say from the sketch, and I can click on, you can see how it's going to grab that point instead of a face, for example. So I'm going to click there, and here we can see the preview of that hole. Now, we don't want it to be counterbored, so I'm going to come over here and say I want it to be a simple hole, and I'm going to type in the diameter, which in this case is 0.125. And I want it to go all the way through. Now I could drag this arrow down or whatever, but instead of distance, I could just say all. And you'll see that it kind of does that automatically for me. So I don't even have to type in a distance or drag. But what's cool about this is now I can click these other points really quickly, and I have holes going through all of those now by using a sketch. So if you haven't seen that before, it's kind of a really quick way of adding a bunch of similar sized holes. Okay. So the next thing, it looks like we're doing pretty good on track. The next thing I want to do is I want to create these little ribs you see here. Again, using the drawing, I can see that they're, where their location is, what size they are, all that kind of stuff. I'm just using my outline here. But I want to be able to create these ribs, and I'm going to use the rib command. I clicked on the wrong tab here. I want to use this rib command. You've seen me use the web command quite a bit, but I haven't really talked about the rib command. This is really cool. It allows you to start with a simple profile, and it's going to create a rib for you. So for example, on this post here, if I were to just kind of draw the outline of a rib, it will extrude it to the tapered angle, to the curved face, everything really easily for me. However, I need to create a sketch, and I want to create that sketch on the surface of this standoff. So the easiest way of doing that is to create a plane at an angle. And you'll notice the description says creates a construction plane through an edge, an axis, that's the key word there, or a line. Now, I don't have an edge to select. I also don't have a line to select. And I also don't have an axis to select. So I'm going to create an axis. So check this out. I'm going to go to Construct, Axis through Cylinder, Cone or Torus. So I'm going to say through cylinder, and I can just click on this cylinder right here, and you'll see this blue line up here. And this is an axis that's going right down the center of that cylinder. Okay? Then I can come in here and say plane at an angle. What's the line? And now I have something I can select. So when I click on that, you'll see that it's actually going to create a plane that goes through that axis. And I can actually set this plane to whatever angle I want. So I could say 90 degrees or whatever. I'm going to leave it obviously at 0 in this case. But I now have a plane that's slicing perfectly through the center of that standoff. Okay? So I'm going to make this a little bit smaller just by grabbing the corners. What I can do now is create a sketch. So I select my plane there. I'll say create a sketch. It rotated it for me, which I actually kind of like looking at it in 3D anyways. So you can see that my sketch is going right through the center of there. Now I want to capture some information, so I'm going to use my P for project. And I've shown this before, but I'm going to highlight it again. I think it's really important. We have two options: specified entities or bodies. If I were to click on this face here and project it, and I turn off my body, you'll notice it only projected the edges. Because there's not really an edge on a cylindrical surface, you don't see it project that. Okay? So I'm going to undo, and I'm going to say project again, but this time I'm going to say bodies. I'll say OK. I'll turn off the body, and you'll notice this time it did. It's almost like it cuts through. It almost does like a section analysis, or a silhouette is probably a better description, and you can see that's the result that I got. Okay? So in some cases, it's actually better to project the body than it is to project an entity. Now, it does, like I said, it does a silhouette, so it projected the bottom, but it did not project this inside face. So I'm going to come back, specified entity, and I'm going to project that inside face. Let's turn off the body now. And now you can see I have something here, and I can catch to this inside edge. So that's the key trick there. Okay, so I'm going to draw a quick profile here. So I'm just going to get near this edge. You can kind of see how it snaps to that edge. I'm going to draw straight out, and again using the drawing, 0.1 in this case. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing down here. I'll zoom up and you can see how it's going to catch to that point. And I'm going to come out 0.15 in this case. Again, according to the drawing. Okay. And in the outline, I show a cool image of this. And then I'm going to connect the dots. So I'm just going to basically come here and connect those two dots right there. And then the last thing is I want to specify how far from the top this rib is. So I'm going to say dimension from there to there is supposed to be 0.2. And you'll notice it continued staying coincident with that edge, and it lifted it up, and it's black, which is good. So I'm going to say finish sketch. Okay. Let's do the rib command. So I'm going to come over here and say rib, and it's asking for a curve. Now watch what happens when I click on this curve. I get this little arrow. I'm going to start to drag so you can kind of see what's going on here, and we get a really weird result. Okay? Well, don't freak out. Right here it says flip direction. So I'm going to say flip direction, and you can see it's basically, are we doing the inside of the curve or the outside of the curve? And so obviously by default it did the outside. If I flip direction, it does the inside. The overall thickness is supposed to be 0.04 according to the drawing. If I zoom up, you can see that's matching the curve and the taper. So it's a really cool command. It's really, really powerful. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And if I don't want my axis to show up anymore, I can turn off my construction right there, or I can turn it off, individually like so. Okay, I was able to create a rib pretty fast. I want it to go all the way around, so we'll use the pattern command again. So I'll do a circular pattern. Again, I'm going to say features, and I'm going to select the rib feature. What's the axis? I'll select maybe this cylinder here, and just like before, you can type in how many you want. In this case, I only want 3. I'll say OK, and I now have 3 of those ribs on that standoff very quickly and very easily. Okay. Now, I want to basically mirror what we just did so I don't have to recreate. So I'm going to mirror it to this other side. Now in this case, if I turn my origin on, because I started at the very center, I can do this mirror very easily. So I'm going to say create mirror. Again, notice I said by default it's usually faces. We're going to come in here and say features. And I want to mirror the rib and the pattern at the same time. What's my mirror plane? My mirror plane is going to be this vertical plane. You can kind of think of it as an actual mirror. You would see the reflection in it. And I get a little preview over here. And I'll say OK. And now my ribs are mirrored over to the other side. Now here's the dilemma. I want to mirror this down to these posts, but these posts are not perfectly symmetric with this plane or pretty much anything on here. And so if I were to try and mirror, they would end up floating out here somewhere, and obviously that would fail. So I need to create a mirror plane. Now you've already seen the beginning of this. I'm going to turn my axis back on. I'm going to want to create a midplane between the center of this circle and the center of this circle. If we were to find the midplane, then I would be able to mirror across it. But to do that, I need to have a plane to select. So I'm going to build those planes. So check this out. I'm going to say axis through cylinder. I'm going to go ahead and select all 4 of these posts. Okay. We already have this plane. I'll go ahead and turn it back on. I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to say plane at an angle. We'll select this guy. Okay. I'll shrink them down just a little bit. So now I have a plane that cuts through here. I have a plane that cuts through here. And if I were to come in and say mid plane, I can click that plane, I can click that plane, and it's going to slice right between the two and say, okay, I now have a mirror plane. In fact, you can see how far off it was from center. But if I were to come in and say create mirror, features, I'm going to select the rib, I'm going to select the pattern, and I'm going to select the mirror. Okay. And then what's the mirror plane? I'll come in and grab this middle face there. Kind of gives me a preview. I'll say okay. And those rib features are now on those posts there also. Okay. Now again, there's probably multiple different ways you could create this. I could have created one, added the ribs, done a circular pattern after I figured out where that axis needed to be, for example. That totally would have worked. So maybe try different methods as you're going through this project. Okay. I'm going to turn off my construction. We don't need to, in my origin, don't need to see those right now. The last thing, and it's kind of hard to see, is on the drawing, I have this rib actually extends out to the body. And so we're gonna do that. And then there's also these little support ribs right here that you can see dimensioned are 0.08 from an edge, 0.04 up from the center. Okay, so let's finish up with that. We're pretty much almost on time. Okay, so I'm going to create a sketch, and this new rib is actually going to go to the very top of this cup. So I'm going to select that face and say create sketch. Okay. Now I want to basically extend this existing rib. So I want to grab some information from it. So I'm going to do P for project. I'm going to project just that face. Okay. And I'll say okay. Then I'm going to draw a line. And if I get close enough, it's kind of hard to see, but it kind of snaps. It's kind of hard with the gray, but as I get near the center, it's going to automatically snap to the midpoint there. And I'm going to purposely draw it off at an angle and not all the way. Okay? Then I can come in here and say, I want this line to be parallel with that line. So now I know for a fact that this line is exactly in parallel with the shape of it. Okay. Then I'm going to come in and draw those two lines over here. So I might just kind of mock this up real quick. Now I'm going to purposely overlap. I'm going to come into something like this, and you'll see why here in a moment. Okay. And I'll go ahead and draw another line down here. I'm going to purposely overlap. Okay. I want these 2 points, so click to keep. I want those to be vertical with each other, so I wanted to keep that one there. And then I'll throw some dimensions on here. So again, according to the drawing, that these are 0.04, I think it is. I'm sorry, 0.4. So I'll do a dimension from here to here, and that's supposed to be 0.4. From here to here is also supposed to be 0.4. Now, hopefully you know this trick. I could type it in, or I could click on an existing dimension, hit enter, and it references that dimension. Okay. Then I know this distance from here to here is supposed to be 0.08. Okay. Now by me adding these dimensions, you'll notice, for example, this dot came out. I'm going to drag it back so it's just inside this body a little bit. And again, I'll explain this here in just a second. But I now have this line and these two other lines where they're supposed to be. So I'll say finish sketch. And let's start with this guy here. So I'm going to come in here and use that rib command one more time. So I'm going to say rib. What's the curve? Okay. And that didn't go the way I expected it to go. Why is that? Flip direction. That's odd. I'm sorry. Oh, I know why. I apologize. I got confused. I actually need to use the web command. So the rib command is good for things like these ribs right here. The web command is kind of like what it's showing in the image, where it's going to extend to faces and kind of fill in a void. So even though this is a rib, we're going to use the web command. What's the curve? This guy. And then I'm going to start to drag and watch what we get. So you can kind of see what it's doing here. It's actually kind of extending to this body here. It's extending down to there. How far? I'm just going to click on an existing face, which is the 0.04. If I didn't turn on extend curves, notice what it does. It just grabs that line and extends it. But this extend curves is extremely useful. And because this face was tapered, or I should say drafted, it extended to that, and it extended to this wall over here. I could have made my sketch go all the way into this wall, and that would totally have worked. That's totally fine, but I left it short just to show you that extend curve. Now, here's the dilemma. If I were to add in this edge here, notice the results that I get, because it's trying to extend the curves and it gets really confused. So we're going to have to break this down into two separate web commands. So I'm going to do this first one here. I'll say OK. And let's turn our sketch back on. Then I'll repeat that command again. I'll come in here and say web. What's the curve? This guy. Now I'm going to turn off extend curves. It remembers my last dimension, the 0.04, and you can see because I drew my point all the way in, it's extending basically into the body, and it's going to match, okay? If I had extend curves on, you'll see it extends all the way to this outside edge right here, and all the way to this outside edge over here. So obviously we can't use extend curves in this case. But I can do both of these lines at the same time. Okay. And then finally, I'm going to mirror. So I'll come in here and say mirror. The features, I want to mirror both of these web features. What's my mirror plane? I'll select that vertical plane there. Say OK. And we now have, let me turn off my sketch, we have that weird looking rib right there that extends all the way to the body, and we've got these extra little supports that we're supposed to have. Okay, last thing is, this is a very black, shiny plastic. You can kind of see how the light's reflecting off of that. I want to simulate that in Fusion, so I'm going to hit A for appearance. So I click the A command, and my appearance comes up. And obviously it's plastic, so I'm going to select plastic. And if I scroll down, you can see we've got a couple different kinds like nylon, ABS, etc. I'm going to do a translucent plastic, but you'll notice there's blue, gray, green, white, red, etc. But I don't see a black in here. So I'm going to grab this blue glossy. I'm just going to drag and drop it onto my design. And I'm going to start to rotate around. I can see a little bit of light highlights, but not as much as I want. So I'm going to right click and say edit. And I have a couple options in here. So for example, reflectance. If I drag it down, you'll see it gets really flat. Doesn't look all that great. If I drag this up, it's going to reflect a lot more of the surroundings. But I also have this roughness, and you'll notice if I crank it down, it looks really plastically, almost too much, right? You can kind of see the highlight there and stuff like that. So I might crank this up a little bit, and you can start to see how that highlight is affected by adding this roughness. So obviously the higher I go, it's less polished, if you want to say. So let's put it maybe right about there, okay? And then finally the color, I'm just going to drag all the way down to 0, 0, 0, which is full black. And now we can kind of see what this plastic is going to look like. I'll say done, and my little icon will turn from blue to black. And there we go. That is it. I only went 6 minutes over. Hopefully you learned some new stuff with this. I picked a topic, which was the draft command, to kind of show how you can add draft. I just noticed I should add draft to the outside face. I did to the inside face, but obviously you'd want to add draft to the outside face also. The drawing and the outline are linked in the description of this video. Please feel free to go through and try this out. If you have any questions or comments, post them in the video. I always go through and read those. Also, post your success out on the Fusion 360 Facebook group. I love seeing everybody out there, showing what projects they're working on and stuff like that. I want to thank Jason for actively answering the questions in the chat. And again, like I mentioned before, please definitely make sure you check out the Autodesk Fusion 360 Live Facebook group. And see what the upcoming live streams are. Like here's one that we just did, the what's new in the March release. Definitely watch that. We talk about the 3D splines, for example. Here's Tyler's live stream he did yesterday on creating that welded tubular front ATV frame. You'll see upcoming live streams, etc. So with that, I want to thank everybody. I missed you all when I was gone. I'm glad I'm back. I know that sounds bad, saying I'm glad I'm back from vacation, but with what's going on out there right now, we're doing everything we can to make your lives more successful and more enjoyable. So thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Happy fusioning.